the School of Psychology, and our main presenter for today. Yes, Lynda, you can come in and present your work.
Thank you so much, Prof. Grace, for that introduction. And I'll get right into it. That is the title for my PhD study, The Dilemma of Youth Empowerment in Uganda. And I was interrogating the mindset question. To start us off, I would like to tell you, this is the overview of my presentation. And I want to start us off with a story. I once shared a taxi. This is a 14-seater public service minibus with a young man of about 25 to 28 years of age among 12 other passengers. I will call him Chidawalime. He spoke a mixture of Luganda, that is the main language spoken in the central region of Uganda, and basic English that pointed towards 1 or 2 years of post-primary education. I don't quite recall what sparked him off, but he continuously ranted about this government money for youth for the entire length of the 1-hour taxi journey. I later worked out that he was talking about the Youth Livelihoods Program, a Uganda government-initiated youth empowerment program. He was so passionate in his argument against the entire program and its setup. Instead of giving us this useless money, they should have built factories and just called us to work when everything is well set, he argued. He also thought that it was unfair for the youth to be asked to pay back the money that they were given to start businesses under the program. They are just looking for ways to put us in prison, he said. Some passengers tried to engage him, asking him to be grateful for the little that was available, even if the system had many problems, but all was in vain. He employed all his youthful energy to shout them down and could not allow anyone to get their opinion across. He insisted on being listened to and refused to listen to anyone else. The last statement I heard from him as I disembarked at my stop was one he had repeated over and over, "Ebya Uganda tebikola," which translates into English, "In nothing in Uganda ever works." So I've always had an interest in youth issues. And the more I reflected on this incident, the more I knew I wanted to take a closer look at youth empowerment. And from that point, it was only a small step to zero into mindset issues. At the time I was thinking about Chidawalime, this comes in at a time when in Uganda, youth account for more than 70% of the population. And empowerment of this population is at the far front of Uganda government and development partners' agenda. The issue of mindset has been part of youth empowerment discourse from as far back as 2016. When we look at the 2016 youth policy theme, it had a theme, mindset change for national development. But when you would look at the programs that were laid out in it, they were almost entirely economically focused. Fast forward to 2020, more concrete steps to address the issue of mindset among Ugandans through the National Development Plan 3. When you look at chapter 18, it talks about community mobilization and mindset change. But again, a careful look at the programs within that, the factors underlying and driving this mindset are not really conceptualized with a local social culture understanding in mind. We would look for some answers from psychology. Indeed, there are a number of contemporary theories on mindset in the field of psychology. For example, the deliberative and implemental mindset theory. And a number of us might be familiar with the fixed versus growth mindset theory. But these mainstream psychological views of mindset undermined the contribution of context and reduce the individual mind to a single information processing unit, almost like a computer. The contemporary conceptualizations of mindset do not provide an appropriate approach to understanding mindset in an African context like Uganda. Our social culture fabric holds aspects of Ubuntu or community. And so I wanted to propose a conceptualization of youth mindset from a sociocultural perspective. I base my conceptualization of mindset on Bakhtin's dialogical view of mind, which explains the human mind as emerging from narratives within the sociocultural context, and the individual constantly positions and repositions themselves within these narratives. To take a closer look at the problem, sometimes youth fail to fulfill some of the obligations that they take on in empowerment programs. And when this happens, popular discourse on youth mindsets in the context of empowerment calls on youth to change their mindset. But this ignores the possibility of a whole range of socioculturally mediated narratives that continue to shape the youth's mindsets. Unless we understand these socioculturally mediated drivers of youth mindsets, it is impossible to target the mindsets for change. The youth will continue to be unempowered and dependent rather than productive, or at worst, they might resort to delinquent activity. And this leaves a gap in Uganda's development agenda that targets empowerment of its large youthful population. To take a closer look at my theoretical framework, I'm looking at a dialogical view of mind, and this is only one among other sociocultural approaches that have been proposed as an alternative to mainstream psychological theories. Kashner and Martin have published a book on the sociocultural turn in psychology, and it brings to us the idea of the contextual emergence of mind and self. So specifically for this study, I am using Bakhtin's dialogical theory of mind. Mikhail Bakhtin is a Russian literary analyst who advances the argument that human actions take place within a sphere of particular cultures. To summarize Bakhtin's dialogism, the thinking process, unlike other activities of pure reasoning, is not a dialogue between me and myself, but it finds always and primarily, even if I'm quite alone in making up my mind, in an anticipated communication with others with whom I must finally come to an agreement. From this dialogical view of mind, the views that people voice, they do not come from inside their heads, but they are appropriated from opinions and views of speech communities from which they are part. To break this down further, even if you are alone in your house, alone in your room, and you're trying to make a decision, you're never quite alone. Within your mind, there is a community of persons that will weigh in on the decisions that you're trying to make. These people might be alive or dead. They might be, for example, your uncles, your family members, your community where you come from, your religious beliefs. They will all come and sit in a meeting within your mind, and they will eventually influence the decisions that you come to. So the individual will constantly position and reposition themselves in relation to the narratives in their sociocultural setting. And this positioning may have a bearing on their choices, actions, and behaviors, and therefore can be conceived to ultimately influence their life outcomes. So the overall research question that I set out to look at was to see how the mindsets of youth from selected youth empowerment programs in Uganda have been shaped by the sociocultural narratives in the society within which these programs operate. And I had two specific research questions. What are the salient narratives within the sociocultural context of youth empowerment that beneficiaries use to tell their life stories? And how do youth position themselves within these salient narratives around youth empowerment? I carried out an exploratory qualitative study specifically using a narrative inquiry approach. This comes from a relativistic stance and a social constructionist perspective. The participants that I had were selected purposively from 3 youth empowerment programs within Buganda region. That is the Youth Livelihoods Program from Kalangala, the Master Card Foundation Program. This is within Greater Kampala, but located in Makerere, and the Cotton Foundation in Rakai. The specific form of purposive selection that I used was maximum variation sampling, because I wanted to get an idea about a typical experience on any of these empowerment programs, and then more of the extreme experiences, whether they were negative or positive. So I set out to interview 9 people. That is 3 from each of the youth empowerment programs. 1 having a typical experience, 1 an experience that could have been seen as negative, and 1 having a very positive experience. For a number of reasons, and the reason I did this, I wanted to elicit the narratives that participants used to tell their life stories and how they positioned themselves within the narratives. So I asked each of my participants to simply tell me their life story. And I elicited the life stories of 7 participants of youth empowerment programs. How do I come from an intention of interviewing 9 to 7? From the Youth Livelihoods Program, a number of these young people have been running around with the police, and they were very afraid that maybe I was going to arrest them. So I was not able to get someone with a very negative experience on the Youth Livelihoods Program. And then when I finished interviewing and writing out the stories for the 8 participants, I realized that one of the other participants had revealed information about themselves that could actually get them into trouble. So I removed that interview from my final analysis for ethical reasons. This is how I proceeded with the analysis. I did 3 levels of analysis. I started with Labov structural narrative analysis. This helps me to get a full comprehensive story with logical flow. When the young people were telling me their stories, they told it as it came to them. But this structural narrative analysis helped me to get a full story that has a beginning and a resolution. And this could allow me to make comparisons between the different stories that the participants told. I went in deeper to do a dialogical narrative analysis. And this is how I found the dialogical narratives, or the resources that the young people were using to tell their stories. And this gave me very many sub-themes. They talked about success and protest and resilience, but I needed to be able to organize this further because these were multiple sub-themes. So I went back to a number of us are familiar with it's okay. I went back and borrowed from some of the more famous types of analysis, and I was able to break these different sub-themes, get a higher level of themes that could then have different levels of sub-themes under them. And this came from thematic analysis to help me create the broader themes from the various sub-themes. And these are the results that I came up with. When I looked at the narrative resources that young people were using to tell their stories, I came out with narratives of identity, narratives of resilience, and narratives of validation. And under each of those, we had different sub-themes coming through. I want to take us through some of the quotes and the responses. I want to talk about each of the sub-themes, but from each theme, I will pick one sub-theme. So when it comes to resilience, I like this quote by a young man called Kalema. At the time that I found him, he was a graduate, but he was selling chapati. And he told me that he had got some good land that side and had prepared the land because he was going to grow tomatoes. But then the season changed. It rained in February and in May. Many farmers got constraints because the season changed. People prepared land and others planted, but things didn't come back. So I got stuck from there. That's where I said, now what next? I had gone there just to farm. The good land was there because land around Kampala and my home area, I couldn't get good land for cultivation. So when the season failed, I said, now let me begin life. I can't go back home. During those times when I was preparing my land, there was a man around there that was selling chapatis. He didn't have workers, so he would tell me, please stay for me here as I first finish this, sell for me this. Because I wasn't busy all the time, we were just there waiting for the rain. When the agriculture business collapsed, I had to learn what he does because I saw I could do nothing else by that time other than just first helping this man to give me something to eat. I didn't get scared that, the project has collapsed and what I was doing according to my academic level. Because by that time I said, now what next? Let me learn, let me earn a living, things will work out with time. You could look at Kalema and look at him as a failure, but he was very resilient and he decided to do something just to tide him over the bad part of the year while he looks forward for things to get better. On identity, there's a beautiful quote from Mukasa. And one of the sub-themes under identity was the family background. And he told me about his mom. My mom, she told me that I should know where I am coming from and I should not be overtaken by the storm of growing up. That really gave me a challenging time because I had not to do what I wanted in order to be what I wanted to be. I would also love to live, but whenever I remember those words, I go the other way around of getting back to the line so I'm not easily ever taken by the distractors. I hear those words in my mind every day. It's like they open my mind every time I think of them, and I think of being a good man who has to work hard such that where I am coming from doesn't resemble where I am going or where I am heading to. So I try to work hard so that my future looks different from my past. Whenever I just hear the voice, I see it that it is not good where I'm coming from, the situation at home, the poverty, the way how life moves at home. So whenever I remember that where I'm coming from is not good, I just want to work hard so that I live in a future that looks better. On validation, one of the things that my respondents talked about is that they felt validated when they could meet their responsibilities. And this is exemplified very well by Nalunga, who says, for me, I have responsibility. And I think that makes me hardworking. There are many things because Dad really discouraged me, but now at this point, he is also proud of me. My father, he told me that my child, what I thought would happen is not what has happened. There are times when a parent can ask you for something and you give it to them. He told me, my child, forgive me for all the things I said, and he asked for forgiveness. My mom, she is proud of me. She can call me when there is a need, and I send her, like, say, 20,000. Like that, you see. Nalunga had dropped out of school because she got pregnant, and the father was very angry with her because he wanted her to go into the police. But now she felt validated because she could meet the responsibility of looking after her parents. So that was on some of the narratives that young people were using to tell their stories. And how did these young people position themselves within the narratives around youth empowerment? Again, I had 3 different themes that I saw coming out of these young people's stories. There was sometimes they would internalize the things that were said to them and about them. Sometimes they would emancipate themselves. By emancipation, they would either protest or directly defy these narratives. And then there was a lot of talk about success because we are empowering you to be successful. And I found that a number of times these young people would go on to redefine what success was for them, different from sometimes what the would-be empowerers and their parents would say. Let's take a closer look at some of the things that they talked about. We have Nantaba on internalization, and she took on a very negative self-perception, and we can see here where it is coming from. It is something people say that if you do not get your parents' blessing, it means you won't be well in future, that even if you do what? That is what I hear. I reached a point and believed I will never be successful because I do not have my father's blessing. I tried to improve, but I felt no one cared, hence the decline. So even in S4, I performed really badly because I reached in the paper and it was hard, and I remembered those bad words that my father used to say about me. And I said to myself, even if I put in the effort, who will see? Even if you ask my friends, I never really used to care because I knew I was on my own. Because there are times when I would not have committed any offense, but my name is mentioned, even if it's someone else, they would put my name. So I started to think it was true. When I go back to that thing, I started to see, because I had got a job in vacation and I worked so well for a month and they didn't pay us. Then they tricked us and fired us. Nantaba had internalized that a negative self-perception from what her father used to say against her, and she believed that she was cursed because she did not have her father's blessing. When we talk about emancipation, Namudu wanted to get married, but her family was really, really against her getting married, and she defied them and got married in spite of her family's opposition. She said, you know, moms, I think be when they don't want their daughters to leave them. So for her, she wanted me to first study and achieve something for myself to become somebody, because she already said, if you are nothing, the man won't respect you. She was saying that first finish studying, you can also upgrade to a master's and finish it. Then you buy a plot and build, then you get a job so that you can be like those single ladies who say they are independent. Yeah, that's what she wanted. Parents be feeling like we have just left school and feel like they haven't yet benefited from us in any way. I don't know. Actually, my uncles were saying, we haven't got anything from you yet. We have looked after you all this time and haven't gotten anything from you, and you want to get married? It's the man going to benefit, and he's even going to make you old. So she had to defy her family in order to get married. And the final theme on positioning was the whole idea of success. Muwanguzi agreed that success is very important, but he defined success for himself as having a personal investment. And he told me a very interesting story about what happened when he chose to leave an office job and started his own investment. My mom, for her, of course, she wasn't happy with it. She got pissed and felt bad. And she was saying, no, you shouldn't have left that job. My mom was really feeling so bad that I didn't have a formal job, like formal employment. Yet personally, my line was into self-employment. So for her, me starting a business is not success. Instead, me getting a job, sitting in an office, putting on suits, being there, you get that monthly income. So that when people ask her around the village, oh, what is your son doing? She can say, oh, he's working with this organization, so and so. She feels happy. But when she tells them that Muwanguzi started a simple company somewhere, they'll be like, really? So for them, they consider success as being up there. My ex-girlfriend, she chucked me because I resigned from the other company where I was working, and she couldn't stand it. She didn't want a person who was like me. I didn't have a job doing this simple work, and I was always dirty. My mom was not happy with it. She said, go back and work, but I told her, Mommy, you know what? let me settle in my venture. She said a lot of things, but I told her I will be strong. I know in the near future, there will be something productive. So those are some of the themes that the young people, the narratives that they were using to tell their stories and how they were positioning themselves within these narratives. What are the implications that I come out with? Whenever we talk about mindsets, the thing that comes to our mind is that it is set in stone. But I want us to shift our attention to look at mindsets rather as a set of ideas, or in this case, a set of narratives. And I want to propose to you the dialogical mindset, which I would define as a collection of socially constructed narratives that one calls upon to understand or engage with any given situation. The individual continuously positions and repositions himself or herself, or sometimes they are positioned by others within these narratives. They may protest or defy the narratives. They might internalize or modify these community narratives with varying results on their decision-making choices, behaviors, and ultimately life outcomes. To continue with the implications, we need to ask youth, we need to stop asking youth to change their mindset. Instead, we can challenge them to recognize their mindset. What are the narratives that form their mindset, and to evaluate the utility of the various community narratives that inform their attitudes and choices, and seek to engage more with the more helpful narratives for their situation. To break down the concept of narratives, I've had some success with talking to youth about the voices that influence their decisions as they go about any area in their lives. Some recommendations for youth empowerment practice. This idea of mindset that I'm coming through with can be applied to various fields, whether in mental health clinical practice, if you want to empower a young person maybe to continue taking their mental health drugs. It can be applied in education. I might want to help a young person to make the decision to stay in school. It can be used in HIV care and support, encouraging a young person to stay on their life-saving drugs. And we need to view our youth beneficiaries in context, to take into consideration their social cultural context and the narratives that exist within these contexts. We need to stop assuming that the beneficiaries only respond to the program messages, but they actually base their decisions on other voices outside the program. When I ask these young people to tell me their life stories, it wasn't very common for them to talk about what they learned from the program, but they would talk about all sorts of narratives, all sorts of voices that came from outside the program. In practice, we can build reflection sessions on salient narratives and voices within the youth's social culture environment. And these need to be built into the youth empowerment programs. And we can have in-depth discussions with youth concerning their beliefs about who ultimately controls their destiny. Recommendations for psychology scholarship. I'd like to encourage fellow psychologists to use research approaches that can capture the respondent's experience. Many times a questionnaire may limit the possible responses that a respondent might give to those that have been imagined by the designers of the questionnaire. We need to listen to people in context and reflect on the economic, social, and structural context within which this person is talking. I want to challenge us to go beyond proving relationships between variables and dare to theorize about psychological phenomena in context. The other thing that I did, and I would like to encourage psychology scholars, is to allow for multidisciplinary approaches. For example, for this study, I borrowed from literary analysis in order to be able to understand the stories that the young people were telling me and to make meanings from them. Some of the contributions: theoretically, a social culture view on mindset. separate from the mainstream psychological views. The dialogical view of mind has been used by others before me. For example, Hubert Hamans has used it to find out the dialogical relationship of an individual within different actors in high environment, and this has been used in the clinical setting. But my study shows how dialogism can be taken out of the clinical setting and applied to empowerment. For methodology, using narrative inquiry into issues of mindset that have originally been looked at in a more positivistic way, complete with questionnaires. And in practice, the idea of looking at the voices that influence empowerment program beneficiaries. Some outputs from this work, I have 2 papers that have been accepted for publication. One is about the social culture and historical milieu surrounding youth empowerment in Buganda. And these are lessons from community and lay perspectives. It has been accepted for publication with the Mawazo Journal. And the other is a chapter on Ugandan youth mindsets, a dialogical perspective. And this is in the book, Selfhood in a Meta-Colonized World, towards Sociocultural Psychological Perspectives in Mental Health and Education, with Julius Chikoma as the editor, has been accepted for publication by the Makerere University Press. I'd like to say thank you, first of all, to my funder, the Andrew Mellon Foundation. It gave me an opportunity to dream, like my principal usually says. I thank my supervisors, Professor Chikoma and Dr. Mayanja. I thank the voices in my head, Dr. Edgar Nabutani and Dr. Levis Mugumya, because they motivated me to finish my PhD in 39 months. The Choose Fraternity, thank you so much. The Panic Crew, you know yourselves. The Gada and Meda and Mellon Foundation fellows, especially the 2018 PhD completion group. My family that is present here and online. I especially thank Mommy and my pastor, Papa, because they recognized the voice in my head that almost drove me out of school in senior 5. I had this voice in my head that was telling me to leave school and go on the street and preach. None of them is a psychologist, but my mother insisted go back to school, and my pastor told me, no, that is not God talking to you. It is the depression that is talking to you. So they are really the reason that we are here today. Posthumously, I would really like to thank the late Pastor Stephen Senfuma and Omukungu Levi Zimbe, because these gave me very useful tips when I was first starting out on my PhD journey. I thank my respondents, my friends, the old and the new that I have made along the way. Thank you so much for your attention. Mwebale nnyo basebo ne bannyabo okumpuliriza. Ssaabasajja Kabaka wa Buganda wangaale. For God and my country, glory to God.